So the last piece we covered on this segment was Call of Cthulhu, so it only makes sense that this segment, the next one, to be about Hangar 18, since we already know these chords, right? So for about the past 2-3 months, one of the first things I do when I pick up the guitar every day is play this Hangar 18 introduction and use it as a chord study. So this segment is going to be all about chords in your plucking hand. So for classical guitar, typical, we'll kind of simplify it into a basic chord technique where you have your thumb on the 4th string, index on the 3rd string, middle finger on the 2nd string, and your ring finger on the 1st string. And when you pluck those 4 together, you get a chord. Of course, there's lots of chord techniques and formations you can use, but this is one of the most basic and one of the most useful to study, I'd say. So I don't know really how many notes Megadeth plays. I don't know if they just do these 3 or if they do 4. But I turned it into a 4-note chord study. I mean, you've got the D and the bass anyway, so it sounds just fine. So using that right hand setup, we can just play the progression. I'll play it slow for you at the end if you need to know what the chords are. And it's a great study. A couple things to keep in mind about chords. So it's one thing to play a chord. It's another thing to play a few chords. But I think the goal of this passage as a study, one of the goals I always have, is to play a clean and accurate chord every single time. It's quite challenging for me to do. And usually I'll warm up and practice it at a tempo kind of like this. And the focus is trying to grab a clean chord, a clean release every single time. And if you start to speed up, to not lose the release or the clean approach to your chord. It can be really useful that way. When I start to speed up, my guitar teacher told me this a long time ago. He said, if you're going to do chords like this, put in some arm instead of just relying on kind of your wrist and knuckles, right? He said if you want to go loud and fast, you're gonna need some of this motion going on. So practice your preparation and release of the chord, and then once that feels very secure, maybe you can put in some arm to help you get it every single time. So it's a fantastic way to study chords. You also have some tricky shifts here in the left hand. A couple of them, mainly this one. That's the main one I had to practice. A bit tricky. One more thing to point out before I show you some different ways that I practice this passage. So your moving line is on the 3rd string here when the passage begins, right? And then it jumps up here, which we've heard that before, right? Just an octave above what we just heard. So a big challenge when I'm practicing this passage is, can I bring out this inner voice, really the only melodic kind of thing we have going right now, within the chord? And I always struggle with this when I play. When I'm playing with chord, the note that my I finger plays is usually going to be the quietest. But sometimes we don't want that. In this case, the note that your I finger plays needs to be, at least audible, or you don't get any movement. It's just the same chord, right? Without that note. So it can be a balance study as well. make sure that inner voice is heard, at least heard enough. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of advice to give you about how to do that because I struggle with it. Some people say push in the string more. Sometimes I kind of lean that way a little bit more in my hand, like I'll lean a little bit more into the I finger. It seems to help. But really, I would just try these different approaches and see if you can find a way. It's a tricky thing to do. Once the passage goes up here, and now our moving line is on the first string, that voice is being played by your A finger, your ring finger. It's much easier to bring out, at least in my hand anyway. So that part is less of a struggle in terms of bringing out the voice. But see if you can work that I finger in, getting this to come out nice and clean. And then the last thing I'll show you here is with chords, studying chords and playing chords, it can be really beneficial for your general hand position. You know, the way that you play arpeggios, your strong setup where you feel secure to play whatever you're about to play. In teaching, whenever I see people do weird things with their fingers when they're doing arpeggios, I just say, okay, can you set up your right hand to play that arpeggio and just play a chord? And then they will, and 9 times out of 10, everything is a lot more uniform and under control. So it's okay. Well, if that's what your finger does when you play the chord, when you do the arpeggio, it's really the same thing. It can be a similar type of setup, and the movement, the chord, sometimes chords can show you the way your fingers want to move more naturally, right? So, because I do a lot of arpeggio study, so I'm thinking about this even when I'm studying chords. So to secure the plucking hand, you know, more across all 6 strings, I take this passage and I play it 2 more times. The first time is just the way that you know it, okay? The way that I've already demonstrated. The second time, keep everything the same except move your thumb to the 5th string. And that's going to be our bass note now. And play the passage just like that. So now you've got this spacing in your plucking hand that's not quite as compact. You've moved the thumb down here. And I want to practice it and play it so that this hopefully feels just as secure as this. At least as secure as it can. I'll play the whole thing like that. Okay, and then we're not done. After that, take the thumb and move it down to the 6th string. And this is the widest spacing you're going to have in this type of chord setup. And it's right now it's not a super comfortable spacing in my hand. I work it every day, but this feels just really like, just like there's a natural weight to it that I don't even have to do anything. Here I feel a little spread out. So I'm trying to make this feel just as comfortable as this. So definitely this is important to play. More difficult. Probably more important to study. And so this is the normal version, right? When we switch to the 5th string, that A is still in the chord. It's in a version, so that still sounds okay. Okay, this E is not really in the chord unless we want to turn it into, I don't know, like a 9th chord or something. So if that bothers you, just do drop D tuning. and it won't bother you anymore. Whatever. So you could do a drop D if that low E bothers you. Maybe the last thing I'll mention is, for real this time, it's fun to kind of make your own rhythms. I mean, one of the things you want to focus on is having the control to keep it even, right? We don't always play everything metronomic and even, but you probably want the control to do that. Okay. Now, once that's kind of in place and you're playing the passage, you can kind of also think like a drummer and put accents like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay. Since you don't actually have drums, if you're playing it like this, oops. So then a step after that I think is fun is throw in some syncopated rhythms. Not so straightforward. You start straightforward. Whatever you feel like doing. It can be fun to do, and if you're going to write anything with chords like that, it would be a fun thing to look at. I would look at it, playing them rhythmically. So those are just some different things to try with this passage. Little did Dave Mustaine know when he wrote that passage how great of a 4-finger chord study it would make for the classical guitar. But man, it really does, really does. So here are the chords. And then you just play them in a rhythm. About 16 times each, I guess. Except this one right here switches early. I think it does. When I listen to it, it sounds like it switches early. So you're going to play this one 16 times, but the second one you only play 15 times. And on the 16th time, switch to that third chord early. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, switch early, and then everything else is just 16 times. When I get this chord, I do a replacement in the middle. You can see I have my third finger on the 3rd string, 7th fret. Somewhere in the middle, I'll replace that 3rd finger with 2nd finger. You don't have to do that, but it helps me, I don't know, it helps me play the chords. And then this one. And there's no early, you know how this one was early? That doesn't happen when you move up here. I don't think. Just FYI.